Good morning, I am Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. You know, sometimes, though, I like to geek out and have fun, and recently we stumbled on an interesting story by Sharad Paul, who is a medical doctor and from New Zealand, in fact, and really interesting story here about our pigmentation, how we got it. His specialty is skin cancer, but he's got some pretty cool kind of geeky stuff about our skin and how we got it. And, you know, it really kind of smacks or slaps, if you will, at some of this insanity that surrounds political correctness and multicultural arguments and that type of thing. And so, Dr. Paul, welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning. And because I come from down under, I suppose I should say good day, Kevin. Good day, mate.
Yes, good day to you, too. All right, tell us a little bit about your story. Give us some background.
Yeah, so I've sort of become a bit of an global citizen in the sense that I was born in England, and my parents then ended up going to India to do medical mission work. So I spent part of my childhood in India, and so I now live in New Zealand, but I also have an academic skin cancer teaching attachment in Australia, so I commute between the two countries. So I guess, and I'm a medical doctor, but I also write both fiction and nonfiction, and my business interests are in the skincare sort of industry.
Yeah, very good. Now, tell us a little bit about the story we stumbled upon. About skin, our pigmentation, a little bit of that
it's
story.
It's really interesting because I often think, you know, we're not having a scientific argument. We're often having an emotional argument about it. So fundamentally, you know, when modern man stepped out of Africa, say about 100,000 years ago, see, the brain is all about movement. So what we know is when humans started walking and migrating more, we needed a larger brain because essentially the brain is a computer. So that's why we know that things like Pilates or yoga or Tai Chi or dance, or where there's movement for movement's sake, perhaps even certain sports, will increase your brain function. So when man needed a larger brain, we had a larger computer, so we needed a larger cooling system. So basically that's the reason humans lost their fur. But when we lost the fur, the skin needed to darken because, see, the interesting thing I do is I also, because I'm a skin cancer surgeon, sometimes when animals are injured, I'm called to reconstruct them because that's my field. And when I was operating on apes, I realized that, you know, a lot of their skin is lighter than human skin in Africa, and largely because the skin darkened in Africa to preserve folic acid. So that happened over like 28 million years. And over that period, while the skin darkened, they developed high levels of vitamin D because once you're dark, you can't absorb vitamin D. But what happened is, as people then migrated into Europe, the skin lightened because to absorb vitamin D because parts of Europe didn't have as much sun as Africa did. So when this population later migrated into Asia, what happened is the skin darkened once more, again to preserve folic acid because folic acid is necessary for reproduction. So the funny thing is, if you step back and think about it, is you can actually predict Olympic track and field medals basically looking at the levels of pre-vitamin D or skin color because that's why African or African Americans or even Africans are naturally good athletes, or that's the reason why Asians are very bad at track and field. You know, I come from India, and I can say, you know, it's a country of 1 billion people has never won an Olympic track and field medal, and it is to do with their fundamental lack of vitamin D.
Huh. And so, wait a minute. So you're covering a lot, and you're covering it fast, and I'm not going to be nearly as quick as you in this still. So, the maintaining of the vitamin D, which with the darker pigmentation, you're absorbing more of it anyway. You're going to be more proficient athletically.
Absolutely. So fundamentally, if you look at it simplistically, it was always a battle between vitamin D and folic acid based on our exposure to the sun. Folic acid helps us reproduce. Vitamin D helps strong bones and teeth, muscle recovery, so makes you better athletes. Now, what happens is when this battle goes on, effectively your skin becomes like the referee. So the skin decides, depending on where you live, effectively your skin color gets determined by it. But there is another factor here, which is your diet. So, for example, polar bears, if you shave a polar bear, it has black skin, and that's the reason because of that was the diet was so high in salmon, and which had high vitamin D and cod, that their skin didn't need to lighten like the other European skin did, which is the same reason why the Eskimos have dark skin as well. So, we can explain things like even the caste system in India. The upper class were vegetarians, so they didn't get vitamin D, so their skin over generations was lighter than the others. So there was a perception in Asia that, being lighter skinned was upper class. So, you could explain everything just based on the science.
Interesting. And so, and it's all based on a little more than geography, I guess, than anything else.
Absolutely. It's based on geography, science, and, fundamentally how much sunlight there is in a particular area.
That is interesting. And it's interesting that most people aren't aware of it. This seems to me, frankly, stuff that should be covered in your basic science courses in before college. It seems
Absolutely.
like to me.
I think it should be at school, in my view, because if people grew up understanding that, all that made us different was just fundamentally, where our roots came from, and because of a pure, biological determination, we wouldn't have all this emotional things attached to it. If you think about it, when the Africans who were in Europe, for example, because the guys who were darker got bred out fundamentally because they ended up being vitamin D deficient because their skin was too dark to absorb vitamin D. And what did that do? That obviously vitamin D does two things. It makes you infertile, but those who are fertile become stooped and bent over. So, of course, if you're bent over and stooped, you're more likely to be seen as inferior. So, we could explain how the attitudes came about, but unfortunately, we've evolved so much in society and industry, but we haven't evolved as much in our thinking.
That is interesting. I think it's a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you bringing it to us today. And I agree with you. It really is just a function of utility in a way. There's no, like you said, if you remove the emotion from it, which is all subjective, it really is just a subject of utility, where you were from and that type of thing.
That's it.
That's fascinating. Well, real quickly, as we wrap it up, tell us a little bit about your practice and how people can learn more about what you do.
Yeah, people can go to my website, which is just sharadpaul.com, and, they can see what I do. But my practice is largely skin cancer reconstructive medical practice, because in Australia and New Zealand, again, for the same reason, we have high UV index, but we have large number of British-based Celtic population who migrated there. So we have the largest incidence of skin cancer in the world. So basically, therefore, I guess that 40% of all elective surgery in Australia and New Zealand will be for skin cancer.
Yeah,
So,
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I've always been interested in Australia, but I got to tell you, my mom is right off the boat from England, so I worry about how my skin would do
That's it.
in that environment. Sharad Paul, you can learn more by going to sharadpaul.com. That's SHARAD Paul, PAUL.com. Thanks for a fascinating conversation. I appreciate it.
Excellent.
All right. When we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at USATheReview.com. And you're listening to The Price of Business.